April 2015.
Very good. I call the Honourable Member Gareth Hughes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Kia ora, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Kia ora. I rise to speak on the National War Memorial Park Pukeahu Empowering Bill. Mr Speaker, we are going to continue to oppose this bill because of the process, because of the precedents, and because of the importance of these values which we in New Zealand hold true. I mean, we support the aims, the objective of this bill was to see a park, to see a quieter, more contemplative space, for us to remember those New Zealanders that served and died for their country. We support this, but we don't support the need for legislation to be able to make a park. I mean, it's simply incredible that we need legislation to make a park. It doesn't make sense when you say it out loud. We need legislation to make a park. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. Mr Speaker, as a Wellingtonian, I want to see a park there. It's a part of the city which is pretty urban jungle. You know, it's full of concrete and shops and commercial and industrial facilities mixed in pretty closely. There's very little green space there. You've got the pine trees up on Mount Vic. Mr Speaker, it's going to be lovely to have a quiet, contemplative space in the middle of the city. I was there recently at an Anzac Day ceremony. It's great when you actually close off the road and you can sit there, quietly contemplate, listen to to the speeches. It's a great experience. But unfortunately, you don't get that for the other days of the year because you've got State Highway 1 going straight past our National War Memorial. So I want to be clear. The Green Party supports the objectives of seeing a park. We want to see a park there. Question is, does the end justify the means? And this is what this bill is, because this bill is giving the government extraordinary powers. The powers to override the Resource Management Act, the Historic Places Act, the Public Works Act, to go over the district plan. Now look, Mr Speaker, it's a dangerous precedent. Now, the member Grant Robertson said it's not ideal to have a process like that. You can say that again, it's not ideal to have a process like this. This is a dangerous precedent we're seeing in our Parliament and abuse which we're seeing continually by the government. Now, the thing is, which both sides of the House won't say, and it's the thing which they don't want to say, but the fact is we're only here in this extraordinary situation where we're passing law to make a park. We're passing law to make a park because of sheer government incompetence. That's the reason we're here. That's the reason why I've got an opportunity cost. We're not considering other legislation to see other things, the important questions our country faces. We're here because of government incompetence. And let's go over history, because the government benches aren't going to talk about the history. Now, Gallipoli, 1915. It was a long time ago. We've had a lot of preparation for this. Helen Clark, the Prime Minister in 2004, announced the formation of the park. 2004, we've had an awful long time to prepare. In 2007, the Labour government committed $10 million towards it, so there was real money behind it. And then we saw the bypass, the road completed roughly 5 years ago, a new road exactly where the government wants to use legislation to dig up. A new road. It's like those council concerns you hear all over the country where ratepayers are concerned because people are digging up the footpath to do something, but the gas company dug it up last year or the year before. We're seeing that in this situation because only 5 years ago this government spent an awful amount of money getting the bypass, and we're going to dig it up now. And then in 2009, the government scrapped the funding. So it was announced 2004, funded 2007, then scrapped by the government in 2009. This is the reason we're here, the reason we're in the extraordinary situation we have to pass legislation to get a park. It's a trend in this government which was started by the earthquake legislation. Now, it's important to note what we're talking about in this chamber isn't a national emergency. It doesn't require extraordinary legislation like this to override numerous legislation and to give the government power through order and council effectively to do whatever they want. Now, Mr Speaker, I think it is important to quote from the Legislation Advisory Committee, and it's quoted in the Green Party's minority report, but I think it's a very important point they point out. They point out, and I quote, "The number of good causes for which government may wish to use its legislative power for is unlimited, and citizens can be adversely affected by apparently worthy causes as well as less benign ones. The bill is an awkward precedent, and the committee is troubled that more of this sort of device is resorted to. It's easier to do it again." We're seeing the process through other transport projects in the country where the government is using the powers to call in projects to constrain public say public rights of appeal, and ultimately a beneficial process, because you want to have numerous voices as part of the planning project. So we note there were a few changes in the Select Committee. We'd like to thank those submitters that made a submission. We note, though, it was a very constrained process. The bill was referred from its first reading on August 28th, last August 28th. Then we saw submissions close a week later on September 6th, and here we are, less than a month after the bill was referred to the Select Committee, here for its second reading. Less than a month. We did see a few positive changes, and I'd like to acknowledge them from the makeup of the review panel, and I understand for the member for Rongotai's comment, it's 3 times a year it's being increased, the review panel minimum meeting times. We've seen the changes to the Order in Council, so now the Minister must have considered all reasonably practical ways relevant to the particular circumstance before he can use the Order in Council. For those people who don't know what an Order in Council is, it basically is giving the Minister the ability to do whatever he wants under this legislation to achieve the objectives. Absolutely extraordinary powers. When you couple with the ability to override the legislation, the RMA, Historic Places Trust, it simply is extraordinary. We've seen some changes to Ministry in Cultural and Heritage, and we'd like to see a commitment from the government benches that the historic St Albert creche, which is right next to this site, will not be moved under this legislation. It's quite important, Mr Speaker, because a fear is what we're going to see is the government using these extraordinary powers to see the next project down the line commence, or at least parts of it. This is the controversial, deeply unpopular, quite fiscally irresponsible Basin Reserve flyover. What we don't want to see is the government using these powers to move things like the historic creche so they can facilitate their plans for an ugly, unneeded, expensive Basin Reserve flyover. So in summary, Mr Speaker, the Green Party supports the park. We want to see it done. We don't think we need legislation to do it. And in fact, if it wasn't for sheer incompetence by the government, we wouldn't have to be in this extraordinary circumstance. We oppose the process. It's a bad precedent. It's a damaging trend of this government. And what we're going to see is ultimately worse decision making. Because what we want to see is people's views actually listened to. And when you have a review panel meeting, and minimum only 3 times a year, you're not going to get those important voices around a table, needed voices, because people's homes, their businesses are going to be impacted. Mr Speaker, it's important we hear from them, and what we're seeing in this bill is simply a fast-tracking, a constraining of those voices. So, Mr Speaker, we're not being oppositional for opposition's sake. We believe we've got good grounds to be opposing this law. We think processes, plans and consultation are important. We want to see a park, but we don't support the process. That's why we're voting against it. Kia ora.
I call the Honourable Member Jamie Lee Ross.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This bill